Well, hello, and finally, here we are. Welcome to Momentous Live, episode 158. I'm Tristan Jutra,
And I'm Jerome Matthew.
special guest. Thank you for showing up, Jerome, today when we're going to talk about iPads and more. Tasia is unavailable. Lots going on in her world right now. Same with Gray. And Will is in transit. He might be on an ocean, on an undisclosed ocean. So thank you for pitching in as we talk about some of the Apple news today.
My pleasure.
I'm getting just a little bit of feedback I can hear a little bit of myself coming from you. I don't know if it's through your headphones or what, but I don't know if we're able to work on that. And hopefully it doesn't show up in the final version, but we'll see. We
Well,
don't
let's
usually
see
talk
what I can do.
production in the actual show, so maybe in the final version this will all be cut out. Who knows? Or maybe we'll leave it in because who really cares? Okay, so let's start off with a little bit of news. But before we do that, just want to remind everyone, if you want to visit us, come check us out at www.momentus.tv, and we will refresh you on that at the very end. But first up, unfortunately, Tasia's not here for this one. What with all the hubbub about the Apple iPad announcements, Google kind of slipped out a little bit of news about its Pixel A phone. So this has become a standard procedure for Google for the last few years. They will come out with their flagship phone generally in the late summer, early fall. So the Google Pixel came out late, so around August, September last year. And then several months later, about 3/4 of the way through the cycle, they come out with a budget version, and they throw the A suffix onto the end. Now, the thing is that these A versions, even though they are late in the cycle, tend to be a pretty good value. And this is where it gets a little confusing for some folks. So the Pixel 8a that we are seeing has it has the same flagship class chip in the Pixel 8, and that's an ARM Cortex X3 with all its various details. It's got a bigger battery, 4,492 milliamp hours battery, so it's a little bit bigger than last year's. And then it's similar to the Pixel 7a in that it's got 8 gigabytes of RAM, 128 gigabytes of storage, and IP67 dust and water resistance, and an in-screen fingerprint reader, along with some wired and wireless charging. It's got a 64 megapixel main camera, same as the Pixel 7a, and a 13 megapixel ultra wide camera. So it's got the two cameras, lenses on the back, and a 13 megapixel front camera. So there's a few little cosmetic changes, but one of the things that has maybe a limitation in the future is the 8 gigabytes of RAM. Apple doesn't normally talk about how much RAM is in their devices, but most of the makers in the Android ecosystem do. And there is some talk that 8 gigabytes of RAM is barely going to be enough to start running some of the locally hosted AI models on phones. And we're going to start to see more of that from Google, Apple, and others. So we'll see if the next generation of phones, where they say the Google Pixel 9 and it's other variations, if they can end up with maybe 12 gigabytes of RAM. One of the other things that sometimes happens is that the price will often drop for the previous A version. So when the 7A came out last year, the 6A dropped down to $349. So that was $100 cheaper. And so that took a little bit of the hype away from the 7A. So this year, Google's not dropping the price of the 7A yet. The Pixel 8A is coming out at $499. The Pixel 7A is still at $499. So you can pay the same price for a newish, mid-cycle model, or a year, like basically a year-old mid-cycle model from the previous cycle. Same price, which is a little strange. The Pixel 8 proper is still $699, and with the specs of the 8A. Pretty close to it. Some people are going to be hard pressed to figure out why they need to spend an extra $200. So what with all that, Jerome, my question to you is, when you're looking at buying a new phone for yourself, you upgrade. I believe you upgraded from you had a an iPhone 10 for quite a while. I think I ran mine for at least 4 or 5 years myself. When you go to upgrade a phone and you're in the Apple ecosystem, do you tend to go for like the Pro model, the basic model, or sometimes like Apple offers models from the previous year or even the year before? They also have the SE model too. What's your take when you jump into a new smartphone, given how long you might want to get out of that particular unit? Because they're not cheap nowadays.
No, I think price is a big factor for me. I don't need for what I'm doing on a phone really high end specs because I'm trying to work as little as possible on the phone itself. So it's a practical device for specific communication purposes. So yeah, I don't need the latest version. I never get the pro version. The the storage is really key for me, right? So, and I've made the mistake and had to upgrade because I didn't go with enough storage, and sometimes that's because of the price.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, that if you needed the latest version device or that was what was available, and then you wanted to save some funds because on the device uh, by going with the lower storage and then later realize it wasn't good enough, then you basically have to upgrade these days. So it is nice that Google has thought about this consumer base that doesn't need a really high end phone, and actually, over $500 is really over the limit for them, and especially considering the competition too with Asian brands of cheap devices, that it makes sense that they have something below the 500 price point that's still pretty impressive features. I think their marketing could have been better. Like, I mean, it's pretty cool that they actually say 7 years of updates and they're like right up front with that because
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of nice to know. Like, oh, could last me up to 7 years. Great, because that's something you think about too with a new phone is how long is this going to last me at this price. But I think the 120 hertz display could have been better described because for the average, consumer, and I'm thinking about like your grandparents, your elderly that need a basic device.
Mm-hmm.
Are they thinking about what's the hertz rating of the display?
Yeah, like nice smooth
So
scrolling, cool. But I mean, could we get it a bit cheaper if we had a lesser display, perhaps?
yeah, yeah. So I mean, so to me, like this is the kind of device where you want to buy something for a family member that is going to do what they need, and they don't need really high-end specs. That maybe this fits into that category. So and I think there's a huge category of people who need a device that aren't really doing very much with it. They're maybe they're using it for a maps. They're getting some emails. They're making phone calls and text messages primarily, and that's about it. Like they're not doing anything crazy with it. So and they may then often buy a secondhand one. But then if they can get a decent phone for this price, then maybe this is a good option, alternative, and it's new and it's got 7 year basically lifespan probably.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, Apple seems to take a little bit of a different strategy by keeping around the phone from the previous year, the iPhone 14 and 14 Pro. Do they keep the Plus around? Yeah, they get rid of. They don't keep the Pro around. They just keep the iPhone 14 and the iPhone 14 Plus around, and then iPhone 13. I think they only keep the smaller one around, and then they still have the SE as well for the absolute entry level device in Canada. That's $579. I think in the States it's about $399. So, but the SE is getting a little long in the tooth. It hasn't been updated. Well, it's 2 years, and even then, that was the iPhone 8 style. So I guess the challenge is like, how many people want to buy something that is quite obviously 1 or 2 years old by getting a 14 or a 13, when if people happen to note that the 15 is the current one, because you're going to get, Apple has generally been pretty good about the updates. I don't know if they ever really stated, but it was at least 7 years of software updates to keep things current. And then with the SE, again, it's about 2 years old, but the specs are are a little, like I said, getting a little long on the tooth, and hopefully they'll be. They tend to update it every 2 or 3 years. But yeah, with the Google Pixels, just every year. TikTok for the last couple of years now, the new one in the fall, and then this mid-cycle budget version. Once they exhausted the demand for the fancy one in the fall, then whoever wants something almost as good for a couple $100 less US, it seems that May is the time to do it. All right, let's move into the big story of the day. iPads like crazy at 7 a.m. Pacific time today at 10 a.m. Eastern, and I guess that was what time is that in Europe? Some people speculate that Apple had their event so early today because they were doing some stuff in London, for example, some hands-on for press, and perhaps in maybe some other European countries there. So it was a little earlier than normal, and these are just pre-recorded now. I think maybe with WWDC there'll be a bit of a live component when that comes in June. But again, most of the WWDC keynotes have been pre-recorded as well. So we had a few things that were announced in the iPad world, starting with the iPad Air. So currently, like, I have an iPad Air 5, and it's just the 11-inch version. And it came out at least 2 years ago, and that's the big thing, is there were no iPad updates last year at all. So it was like this iPad drought, and people were like, oh, they finally going to do something? Well, they finally did. So the iPad Air 2 saw the updating from the M1 to the M2 processor as one of the big things. And the other big thing they did was introduce a new 12.9-inch model. I think Apple's just calling it 13-inch model now, but kind of rounding up. So kind of like the iPads Pro, which they come in the 11 and 13-inch, we now have iPad Air 11 and 13-inch. And this kind of mirrors what Apple did with the MacBook Air last year. The MacBook Air has been 13-inch for so long, with the exception of a tiny 11-inch version they had a decade ago. But other than that, the 13-inch was really the only the MacBook Air option. And last summer, they introduced the M2 MacBook Air in both 13. I guess they already had the 13-inch. They introduced the 15-inch screen size. And then when they updated the MacBook Air to the M3 processor earlier this year, again, they had the 13-inch and the 15-inch. So now with the iPad Air, we've got the 11-inch and the 13-inch. So the more budget-friendly models are getting larger screen options. Previously, if you wanted larger screens, whether it was with a MacBook or an iPad, you had to jump up to the Pro models, which was a bit much. Some people just want a bigger screen without all the extra features that the Pro models, be they iPads or MacBooks or even iPhones. Again, Apple did a similar thing with the iPhone Plus, which is like the scaled up version of the regular iPhone. So people didn't have to, get an iPhone Pro Max to get the nice big screen. So we can see this throughout the lineup now. Apple's strategy is giving people more options for sizes without having to upgrade all the way to the Pro models, which I think is probably wise. And you can, because if you can get people spending a little bit more money to get a larger model than having a smaller one, and you're making more that way than the number of people who would actually upgrade all the way up to a Pro. Other than that, on the iPad Air, they moved the webcam from the vertical portrait orientation to the sort of the landscape orientation, which is great because on my iPad Air, it's in the old school spot. And if people using a keyboard with their iPads nowadays, be the Air or the Pro, then your webcam's off to the side and it's all goofed up. Your eye lines are all wrong when you're talking to people. And they had moved it on the entry-level iPad a couple of years ago. So finally, we're getting a new webcam location for the iPad Air, but also the iPad Pro. So just with these updates, the increase in storage size as well. They got rid of the 64 gigabyte option, thankfully, and now they've added additional tiers, 256, 512, all the way up to 1 terabyte of storage. Any thoughts on this? This isn't the entry level iPad, it's sort of the mid-tier iPad. Jerome?
Yeah, well, I have an iPad Air 3, I
Hmm.
believe it is, and um, I gifted it to a family member because it wasn't able to do what I wanted to do, and I
Hmm.
realized that, oh, okay, it doesn't do sidecar, I believe it's still called, and things like
Hmm.
that, and it was a little bit too small. So it's kind of nice that there's a bigger option, um, because to me, like, yeah, less than 12 inches feels a bit too small for what I might want to use it for.
Hmm.
Because you have your phone for stuff that you want to do on the phone, but when you're using an iPad, I feel like you want it to be like I'd rather use the iPad for this, for watching this or playing this game
Hmm.
than a phone, and that's why you use an iPad or screen sharing. In my case, I love to have the option to use it as a screen. So I can never get enough screens in the work I do. So
Yeah.
it's like more screens is always a bonus. So
Sidecar is amazing. Why don't you explain for those who might in our audience who might not know what Sidecar is, exactly what it is and how you use it?
yeah, well, it simply allows you to use your iPad as a screen, and all you have to do is say, as long as you've got Bluetooth enabled, I believe it's using Bluetooth,
Hmm.
and you just on your MacBook or your computer, you just tell it to use your iPad as a one of the screens, and wirelessly it will connect, and then you can move Windows to that iPad, and it works like another monitor, even though it's not connected in any way, which is pretty cool. So
It just wirelessly, yeah.
yeah, and so you can add another monitor quite quickly and easily. And so the larger size iPad then becomes a lot more attractive if you want to use it for that purpose, because then it's anything below 12 inches is a little small for an additional monitor. But I kind of use, having the smaller iPad, I use it as something that will display a specific piece of software that is sort of something you might just be glancing at, and you're not doing much on it, but you want to see, for example, a level meter, an audio level meter, or say a video player or something. Then it's out of the way on the normal computer screen, and you can put it somewhere else, but you can still have it there if you want to glance at it. So that's how Sidecar can be useful. And I think that this new Air is distinguishing itself because the pros have now a very fast and powerful new chip, and so, but these have the older, not that old, but still older chips. So
M2,
different
yeah.
performance. So
Hmm.
with the M2, so they're quite distinct between the Pro or the bigger ones now that have those more advanced features and specs. So, and obviously then lighter and cheaper. So there's quite a good distinction, I think, still. But then you have the option for the bigger and more uh, fully featured Air as well, with the 1 terabyte storage is pretty
For
pretty
sure.
high. I don't know if that's the highest we've seen on an iPad, but I believe it's the
In an Air, it is. The Pro go
yeah
up to gone up to 2 terabytes for a couple of years now.
yeah.
I had this issue a couple of months ago where I was getting out of my car with my briefcase, and I had my MacBook Air and my iPad Air both in it, and it got caught on something, and the top wasn't done up, and both fell out onto the road. And luckily, the MacBook Air was fine. It had a hard shell on it, and my iPad Air was in its sort of magic keyboard case, which absorbed some of it. But unfortunately, it landed on the corner where the Touch ID sensor slash power button is on the iPad Air, and it shattered. So I was not able to use Touch ID to log into the iPad Air anymore, which was fine. I was able to use my passcode. However, something happened eventually. The battery ran out, and then when I went to charge it up again, it went into recovery mode. I think because maybe it thought that the power button was actually depressed in. It may have been stuck in the way it kind of got mangled. So at that point, there was nothing else I could do. I couldn't dislodge the power button. So I took it in for repair. I went to Apple's website, took it in to find out what it took to repair it. you don't have to go to Apple Store anymore. You can go to an authorized repair center. So I went to the local London Drugs, only a few blocks away, and they said, "Yep, okay. So when it comes to repairs for iPads, it's basically a replacement." Like, okay, cool, 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 cool.
Is it still
And
under warranty?
yeah,
So,
nope, nope, not under
oh,
warranty anymore.
oh,
And
darn.
even if I had, because it was long enough ago that even if I had Apple Care Plus, I don't think it would have been covered for
Uh,
accidental. But whatever. So, or maybe it would
yeah.
have. I don't know. I don't usually bother with Apple Care Plus. So the
Hmm.
the thing is, you have to pay for a new one, except you get it at half price. So,
Oh,
but I knew that there was going to be new iPads coming soon, so I was like, oh, what do I do? But at the same time, like my iPad usage requirements are not that intense, so rather than like paying full price for a fancy new iPad, be it an Air or otherwise, I figured, you know what, I'd rather pay half price for a 2 year old model or however old it is at this point, because it's going to serve my needs just fine. And it's probably a good thing, because if I knew if the iPad Air was going to have storage up to 2 terabytes, I probably, like a chump, would have paid the extra money, because I almost always max out the storage. So the maximum on the iPad Air, the two options you could get when I got mine were 64 gigabytes and 256 gigabytes. And so I got the 256, which is fine. On my phone, I've got 1 terabyte because, bad with money. So, but the iPad Air, again, it's the mid-range model at the time, and fine, 256, I can live with that. And I haven't even come close to using it all. But just with the new ones, oh, well, 1 terabyte, of course I'd do that. And next thing you know, you're spending like way more money than you really need to, or that I really need to. So anyhow,
but that is the
so
biggest thing that you regret when you purchase any of these
yeah,
devices. Like, I didn't get enough money, and that's also
enough
often
storage.
forces
Yeah,
you to
yeah,
upgrade
yeah,
as higher resolution audio and video come and
yeah.
photos come out, and you're like, oh, now what? So,
So, I mean, and that's the thing, is that part of it is really understanding what you use your device for. My iPad is usually mostly just a consumption device. I'd get some light work done on it, emails and whatnot. I'm not doing video editing or anything like that. I very rarely download videos to consume while traveling, because I haven't been on an airplane in 10 years. So, there's, part of it is just like knowing how you use things. My phone, on the other hand, like I maxed out the storage on that, because I still like to load up as much music as humanly possible on it. Again, even, I mean, I know that streaming exists, but whatever. um, and I don't like the feeling of having to, mess around with like deleting apps or data and all that kind of stuff. And again, on the iPad, I don't have nearly as many apps as I do on my phone, because I'm using my phone all day, every day. iPad just comes out once in a while, especially when one has, a regular, desktop computer and a laptop as well. So
yeah.
otherwise, my gut instinct would be like, let's go all the way, max out the storage, get the pro model. It's like, no, I don't need a pro. So speaking of pro, let's get us over to the some of the other big Apple news, and that was the launch of the iPad Pro. And it turns out the rumors, or some of the rumors, were right, including the M4 chip. Like, so
Wow.
iPads have skipped the M3 altogether. The iPad Air has the M2 now, which I think the previous iPad Pros did as well. No, yeah, because my iPad Air has got an M1 processor, but so the iPad Air has gone to the M2. Cool. And so once they announced that, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess the iPad Pro will maybe get the M3. No, they're skipping the M3. They're going all the way to the M4. So the iPad Pro is the first Apple device with the M4 processor before any of the Macs, which is kind of wild.
I was
And
surprised about that too, and I was like,
yeah,
is that, yeah, is that like the first device with the M4?
basically, yeah.
Wow.
So what I understand is that the M3 chips that Apple was using were kind of not exactly where they wanted to be. They were rushed a bit. They're using a manufacturing process that's not ideal, and it was kind of like a stopgap. Part of it so they could say they have an M3, part of it just to get some gains, but the performance improvements from the M2 to the M3 weren't huge. So, but they wanted to be, first with the 3 nanometer TSMC process. So they could, talk about that. But really, the M4 is a better, a more modern process for the manufacturing of the processors, and that is where Apple wants to be. So, I think they just want to get off the M3 as quickly as as quickly as possible. So, yeah, and it's a great way to be able to sell some iPad Pros for those who actually need all of the features that come with it. So just there's, I mean, there's so many speeds and feeds we could talk about with the iPad Pro. Some of the key like highlight include, as mentioned, the moving of the camera, again from the portrait orientation to the landscape orientation. That's great. It's got the M4
Hmm.
processor, as mentioned. It's much thinner. Now, during the event, I noticed that they were doing this thing with a big compressor sort of thing to like they're squishing stuff down, and I thought, oh no, are they going to try and make things thinner? I thought Johnny Ive had left the company and Apple had like let go of this maniacal desire to have everything as thin as humanly possible. Well, yes, they've actually made it thinner, and now the iPad Pro is thinner than the iPad Nano was back in the day, which is crazy when you think about it. I don't know why they had to do that. If they kept it the same thickness, they would have probably got more battery in there. But A, it's a marketing thing, and B, and this is what kills me a little bit, you get new dimensions for all your accessories, including the new Magic Keyboard for iPad Pro. And now you can't use the new Magic Keyboard for the iPad Pro with the iPad Air. Previously, you could use the same Magic Keyboard for both the Pro and the Air. So now they've bifurcated because we got a different thickness, and they just wouldn't fit quite right. Not to mention, all of the third-party accessory makers are now going to have to make new sizes for any cases and whatnot. That's a little bit of a bummer, especially when you think about e-waste and all that kind of thing. But other than that, yeah, more just there's not like actually like a ton to talk about aside from like the M4. It's got the neural engine, so for the forthcoming enhanced AI features. Not to mention the existing machine learning features that they always talk about with their photo and video processing and the like. But they took the opportunity to talk about a new generation of Apple Pencil. It's called the Apple Pencil Pro. So I don't know how many are we at 4 different kinds of Apple Pencil now. That's a little crazy in itself. It's got a pressure sensitive aspect to it, better sensor, haptic feedback that responds to squeezing and then twisting. So they call that barrel roll. It's like you're playing Star Fox on the Nintendo 64. You get some with the accelerometer in there. That's pretty cool. You can enable some new features. And uh, yeah, I mean, we've got the 11 and 13-inch size. Oh, the screen. Oh, that's one of the other key features. OLED screen, organic light emitting diode screens, have finally come to the iPads Pro. Super bright, 1,000 nits for both standard dynamic range and high dynamic range content, with peak brightness for HDR content of 1,600 nits. So you can blast your retinas with content on your iPad Pro now, if that's what you really want. It's updates to the camera and the lidar and the True Tone flash and all that kind of stuff. Again, it's like the previous versions, up to 2 TB of storage, and the cellular option 5G, like the previous ones as well. I wish Apple would give us cellular options with the Macs. Come on, they've got them for the Apple Watch, they've got them for the iPads, but not the Macs. Come on. I mean, tethering works, but it's kind of janky, and it keeps dropping the connection if you put it to sleep, and you got to re-tether. I mean, I've got cellular in my iPad Air, and I love it because it's just like a cheap add-on to my cellular plan, and it's just one less thing to have to futz with. So
Yeah.
anyhow, that's the iPad Pro in a nutshell. The updated the Magic Keyboard. It's aluminum now instead of that weird kind of sort of velvety plastic case before that apparently doesn't wear very well. Mine's okay so far, but I don't use it a ton. You got the silver option, the silver aluminum with white keyboard option, and then the space black option. We'll see how the fingerprints appear on that. But apparently, it makes the iPad Pro feel more like a MacBook now. And so even though these are different devices, they're starting to feel more and more alike. And then one other thing that was a late breaking bit of information I heard as that the iPad Pro also comes with a nano-texture glass option, similar to what we see in some of Apple's external displays for their Macs. And that you get less brilliant colors that way, but less glare and less apparent or less visible fingerprints as well. So they are really like up in the number of variations and options for the the iPad Pro at least. So any thoughts on the Pro, Jerome, before we do a little mop up in this area?
Well, speaking of the nano texture glass, I am
Mm-hmm.
all about that feature because I it drives me crazy that all the devices have this reflective mirror like screen. Like I just can't stand it. So
Mm-hmm.
if that option is available on a device, I'm probably going to get it because I just love that you look into the screen and you see what you want to see, not a reflection. And so that's great. A great option, and it's great.
Are you happy to pay like at least like probably another $100 to get that though?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
I would if it's a device I'm using
Mm-hmm.
regularly,
Mm-hmm.
like a phone or even an iPad. Like if you're watching movies and playing games on it, like that's a huge game changer to me. I
Mm-hmm.
think I just don't like the reflective displays, and I think it's great that you have the OLED option,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's a matte option that you have people have choices depending on what they're doing with it.
Mm-hmm.
That you do it going full high-end video because you're a designer, then you're going to want the OLED, and you have that option.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good that that they've provided that, and I think this is clearly like this new iPad with M4 chip and the features it has is clearly going for a pro market that is not us, that is designers and people who are creating on their iPad. And then this is why there's a new Magic Pencil as well. As these guys are doing very fine-tuned, finely like uh, nuanced, detailed uh, creation and design on the device. So having the speed is key, and having the OLED and the Magic Pencil, I think, is key for someone who's designing, they're creating with this. And they might want to do it in an environment that feels inspiring and not at a desk or somewhere, and they want to do it anywhere. And I can see this is going for that
Mm-hmm.
market. They show people doing like stuff like playing a game, and I don't know about that with the pencil. Is that what they were like? But I mean, it's. I think the market is designers really that
Yeah.
want to use it as their main device, and it looks like with this new Magic Keyboard that they're also like suggesting that maybe this can replace a computer, depending on what you're doing, and that's the ultimate is if the iPad can replace your computer and iOS is good enough that the apps that you can run are able to do that, then it kind of makes sense because the computer is still kind of bulky, even especially with the new M chip series. The computers I feel like have gotten heavier, um, especially the Pro computers. So having one that is more portable, a device that you're using as your main work device,
Mm-hmm.
it seems makes a lot of sense. And I've noticed a lot more of even the Pro apps that I use having iOS versions, and they're getting more and more fully featured. So it's starting to look like okay, this is trying to suggest well, if you want to use a computer, you can do almost anything on the iPad now.
Well, and then that's the thing. This was years and years ago now. I remember Tim Cook saying, the iPad was the purest expression of Apple's conception of the future of computing, or some
Hmm.
grandiose statements along those lines. And they even had some advertisements where there was a girl saying to someone else, someone was asking her about what kind of computer she has, and she said, "What's a computer?" Right? Like it's
Yeah,
like because she was
yeah.
using an iPad, and think one of the things that's actually been holding the iPads back, the hardware hasn't been the problem. honestly. It's iPad OS. They forked iPad OS off from iOS a number of years ago now, and it still seems to be what's holding the hardware back. It of course it adheres strongly to its iOS roots, which it all comes from the iPhone originally, and it was scaled up for the original iPad back in 2010. But by forking it off into iPad OS, giving it a new name, and having additional iPad specific code that you'd think they would have more iPad specific features. And so they're doing stuff like Stage Manager, which is still not great. It's a similar feature to that's on the Macs, but on the iPad, it just hasn't really achieved what people are looking for window and app management and the like. And then when it comes to other apps, we're seeing more and more pro apps, which is great. But it seems like Apple is really leaning into the pro creative market for this device, because that's where the dollars are, that's where the margins are. We'll talk about some of how high some of these prices can get. And in terms of the weight, yeah, once the iPad on its own, quite amazingly thin, very light. Surprisingly, the iPad Air is actually heavier than the iPad Pro now.
Oh, really?
And they figure a lot of it has to do with how much weight is in the traditional mini LED screen of the iPad Air versus the new OLED screens on the new iPad Pro. So this is like the iPad Air. Air, remember Air used to mean light, like the MacBook Air. It was light. Well, now it's actually heavier than the iPad Pro, but we'll see with it. Now, I think Air is just means kind of like the mid-tier thing for most people nowadays. And then once you stick a Magic Keyboard onto it as well, the weight is getting into that laptop territory. I mean, it's still a little bit less because it's only 13-inch instead of, say, a 14-inch or 16-inch MacBook Pro. But as compared to a MacBook Air, there is not a lot of between there. So we'll get into some of those issues in just a sec. But let's just do a quick little bit of mop up here. There were no updates to the entry-level iPad. Though they did reduce the price. So it was $449 and it came down to $349 now, but Apple got rid of the previous $329 version that still had the home button. So I wonder, you can still find them on Amazon and elsewhere. I wonder if they'll end up sending those, keep making them and selling them exclusively through Walmart, like they're doing with the M1 MacBook Air now, but keeping it at arm's length from Apple. So, they're not the home of the cheap stuff. And you go to Walmart for that, tap into maybe a market that didn't have a ton of exposure to Apple products in the past, but at a price point that might be more appetizing for their regular shoppers there. So that remains to be seen. But right now, it's not on the 329 original version with the home button, I guess it's the 9th generation. Is no longer on the Apple site. So that's been fully replaced by the 10th generation one, which kind of looks like the Air, at least the previous Airs. And it's nice to see that that's come down by $100, because $449 for the entry level felt high, and that's in US dollars. But bearing in mind, like when the iPad first came out in 2010, a lot of people thought it was going to be like $1,000, and it launched at $499 for the entry level, which was the 16 gigabyte version, and it got higher as you went to the 32 and 64 gig versions. I think I got the 64 gig again. Bad with money. Didn't want to run out of storage space, and still have that one kicking around actually. So a little bit of news, but no update to the entry-level iPad. We're still at the 10th generation. Again, that one's 2 years old, so it had like a footnote, and then they also mentioned the iPad Air, but just in passing, and blah blah blah, and the iPad Air. I'm sorry, not the iPad Air. Sorry, the iPad Mini. That's what I meant to say. So
there's still a Mini.
Zero updates to the Mini, no imagery or anything. They just kind of mentioned it in passing. So the iPad Mini, I think we're at 6 right now. Stephanie, my wife Stephanie's got one. It's great as a consumption device and as an e-reader and the like, and for casual games. But again, no updates to that one in at least a couple of years. So,
well, there's discussion about when Apple does a further product launch, that there'll be some possible updates. So we'll see, I guess.
Maybe we shall see. I don't think they're in any rush because it's probably a pretty low volume device. One other little resource we wanted to leave folks with when they're trying to wade through all the options, there's an article from The Verge. We'll have a link in the show notes about this, which actually has a chart that lists the key features for the 11-inch iPad Air, the 13-inch iPad Air. So these are the new 2024 versions, along with the 11-inch and 13-inch iPad Pros from 2024, plus the 2022 iPad Air. So I guess that's version 5, and along with the 11-inch and 12.9-inch iPad Pros from 2022 as well. And you can just see side by side things like which processor they're running, the size and type of screen they have, and the screen resolutions, the type of cameras they have, front and back cameras, the video recording, the number of speakers, the pencil compatibility. That's important because not every Apple Pencil works with every iPad. So the new Apple Pencil Pro, for example, will not work with the iPad Air. What connectivity? They're all on USB-C now. Some of them, I think the Pros have Thunderbolt support. I guess that was one of the things about getting rid of the iPad ninth generation. That was the last iPad that still had the Lightning connector. So Lightning is now gone from the iPads. This chart also includes weight. So we can see now, as mentioned, that the Airs are heavier than the Pros here. With the dimensions, their size, if they use Touch ID or Face ID. So again, the Pros are using Face ID. The Air is still using Touch ID. That's one thing that would tempt me to go to the Pro. It's like Face ID is so nice.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so spoiled, just from the iPhone. But sometimes just getting your finger, like especially on the little power button, getting your fingertip just right. It seems to take a couple of times.
It's an upgrade to have the Face ID, and it's great to have these comparison charts, like to sort it out and figure out what you need.
Exactly. Battery life. And then, of course, the prices too. Now, this is fascinating because you can see where where things have gone from each generation to the next. So the iPad Air, for example, starts at the same $599 US price, but the previous generation, you could get the upgrade, as mentioned, to 256 gigs of storage, up for for another $150 more. So $749 up from $599. So now you can pay all the way up to $1,099 US if you get the top tier of storage on the iPad Air. So that's the thing about have those extra options. They're going to be some dum-dums like me who are going to be like, well, I want all the storage I can get. So instead of spending $749 US, now they're spending like $1,100 US, which is fiendish, but it's brilliant. Like people will buy it. Great, good for them.
If you spend an hour on the train commuting, then maybe it's like worthwhile, right?
Exactly.
So.
And then similarly, we've got one more tier of storage. Oh, actually, one less tier of storage option on the Pros from the previous generation. I guess they got rid of the entry level tier, and but again, that brings the starting price on the Pros from $799 and $1099 for the 11 and the 13-inch respectively, up to $999 and $1299. So your entry level on the Pro is going up by $200, and in each case for each size, and your top end price is going up by $100 in each case. So they're gonna make their money where they're gonna make their money, of course. And then we've got the SIM options if you want to have a cellular, and then this chart also lists the type of display capabilities, True Tone, ProMotion, and then even things like the True Tone flash in the camera. So we'll have that link in the show notes for people who are trying to figure out if they want to buy one of the new ones or maybe one of the previous models from a couple of years ago. In addition to that, again, Jerome, you were mentioning about how an iPad could possibly replace a laptop, specifically a MacBook. There is an article from Mashable that we'll link in the show notes that is facing off the iPad Pro 2024 versus the M3 MacBook Air. Again, the iPad Air only has the M2 processor, but the MacBook Air is cheaper than the iPad Pro. I'm getting myself confused. They're comparing the iPad Pro to the MacBook Air, so not the iPad Air. All these words, it gets so confusing.
Yeah.
Um, so
Similarities.
so the MacBook Air is cheaper than the iPad Pro. The specs, it kind of depends on what you're looking for, but the iPad Pro now has the M4, whereas the MacBook Air only has the M3. Storage is a mixed bag, but you've only got a couple of options on the Air. It maxes out at 2 TB, but so does the iPad Pro. That was the one thing that's keeping me from upgrading my MacBook Air. And I keep saying iPad Air, is I want more than 2 TB of storage on my laptop, and they're kind of forcing me to go to a Pro, and I don't want to pay for a Pro, so we'll
Mm.
see about that.
Yeah, but it's
Um,
great to have the comparison. But I guess it's
mhm.
going to come down to what is someone doing with the
Exactly.
device, right?
Exactly. So, of course, on an iPad, you can use the Apple Pencil. Can't do so on the MacBook.
Hmm.
Battery life is, we don't have the real world figures for the iPad yet, but they're touting, you know, I can't remember what it said on that previous chart. Is it 10 hours? Uh, do, do, do.
10 hours, but
Yeah.
it was down.
I know it's not on this chart. Anyway, I mean, strong battery life in either case, but it comes down to a question of, like, do you want something with a laptop natively, or do you want a tablet that you can attach a laptop, sort of a laptop style keyboard to, including the larger touchpad. So that was one of the other updates to the Magic Keyboard as well.
Yeah.
So, but and you've got that touch capability if you want it. So it's getting trickier for pros now. But
Mm.
ultimately, like, here's another fun article from Mashable where it talks about, you can max out the new iPad Pro. You can get up to 3 grand now, and it's
It's
saying with
crazy.
its new $3,000 iPad, Apple proves its evil genius. And this our author Stan Schroeder is saying, well, I guess I'm paying that 13-inch Pro plus the squeezable pencil now. Like, once you add the keyboard to it and the pencil, yeah, you're pushing 3 grand, which is wild to think about.
Yeah.
You get the 2 TB and the like. So they're really, like we discussed, pushing this the Pro to creative professionals, those especially who are doing things like maybe photo editing, video editing, audio editing, and the like. And as such, Apple has updated two of their Pro apps, Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro, for the iPad. They don't do aperture, so I don't know. I guess they've ceded the photo editing market to Adobe. So you're using Photoshop, or what's the Lightroom, I guess, is the big photo management one from Adobe. But they've added a number of features to Final Cut Pro 2, including live multicam, where you can film one scene from up to 4 different angles or viewpoints simultaneously, so you can connect your iPads and iPhones to make that happen. You can edit right off of an external hard drive. Final Cut Camera lets you use your iPhone as a camera, with live feeds in there. Um, Logic Pro 2, they've added some AI features in there, including auto dividing of stems, so auto creation of stems from your tracks as well. So, as a professional yourself, Jerome, and you tend to use mostly in your main studio, like, say, your iMacs, but in your one of your other studios, you're using your MacBook. Could you see a point with the increased capabilities of these iPads of ever actually using an iPad Pro for pro purposes?
Well, I think since in the studio the computer kind of just sits there,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't really make sense. But if I was traveling a lot and I wanted to be able to take it and then have flexibility of where I'm working, um, then I could see might make sense, you know. So I maybe it's I'm not the market for that, although they're showing it, for video editing and such. But
Mm-hmm.
um, I think it's a different market that they're catering this product to. But it really depends what someone wants to do multiple things with one device, then
Mm-hmm.
now it's getting a lot easier. And I think with the specs, you could definitely do most of what you're doing on a computer now. And as you said, the iPad OS is now its own OS. It's getting more developed and maybe closer to the Mac OS, and then ultimately it will be like possible to do whatever you do on the MacBooks. So yeah, for me it's not like that attractive, but I do more and more on a MacBook because of the
Hmm.
specs than I could before. I used to have a dedicated machine, a Mac Pro or Tower, and you don't anymore. So now it's the same situation with the iPads. Is you used to have to use a a laptop to do certain things, and now it's kind of getting fuzzy the line like where you need to use a laptop and an iPad. So it's quite interesting to see.
So in Logic Pro, which is the audio app, which is closest to your world most of the time, the features as mentioned, including the stem splitter, so breaking music into its constituent parts. They've also added to their session players, so a personalized AI-driven backing band, so a drummer and a bass player, for example, and a keyboard player as well. And then they've got something called Chroma Glow, where it models the sounds produced by a blend of the world's most revered studio hardware by leveraging AI and the power of the M series Apple Silicon. Users can dial in the perfect tone with 5 different saturation styles to add ultra realistic warmth, presence, and punch to any track. They can also choose from modern clean sounds,
Hmm.
nostalgic vintage warmth, or more extreme styles that can be shaped and molded to taste. So the impression I get from both the Final Cut Pro and Logic Pro updates here is that they might not be geared to like hardcore professionals per se, because I'm sure you look at some of these features and go, yeah, I don't think I'm going to be using like an AI driven backing band for my professional music production, et cetera, et cetera. But rather, it seems like they're really focusing on, quote unquote, creator class, where, people that are, cranking out songs on their laptops and, giving it a go to post on SoundCloud, maybe YouTube, or maybe they can get on Spotify, through CD Baby or what have you. And, those folks on the video side that maybe they're YouTube creators and, they're mid-tier or, lower to mid-tier, maybe not the high-end folks. And if they're doing, especially if they're a one-person shop, or they can do a lot of this stuff themselves and use a lot of those time-saving tools in there. Am I crazy, or is that the impression you're getting too? Like, would you use a lot of these features for your actual pro work as opposed to, aspiring pro or enthusiast work?
Well, not really, but you see the even the pro tools I use have
Hmm.
this stuff kind of stuff in it because they're trying to cater to a wide market, and so you have the amateurs and all the people like that want to jump on board and
Hmm.
use the device to make music or to do a soundtrack to their video or TikTok, and then you have the pros who are doing like high level surround sound, like uh film mixes. So there's a range of users. Usually they have different products for the different users. So like I use Steinberg, and they have Cubase, and they have 3 versions of Cubase, and then they have Nuendo, which is the pro post production tool. So they have like 4 different versions of their tools for different people, but you can upgrade them. So, but essentially they all have very similar functions with just slightly different, more professional features. So all the software is going this way, and they have to. Logic Pro had to make this update because to be competitive, because I mean, they're kind of 2 years late with some of this stuff, but it's been out in the market for 2 years. But then at least if they have this in there, then people will say, oh, okay, they have these AI functions, they have the split functions, which is a very cool tool for remixing and such, and it's now built in. They don't have to buy separate software. So like good production software has some of these features built in, so that you don't need to buy separate software or have different plugins and add and spend more money. And that's one of the things that made Nuendo the Pro Tools killer, is they had features that were 2 or 3 years ahead of Pro Tools, and they had features that you used to have to spend $300 or $400 as a separate plugin built right in, and they were as good as the third party tools. So having those built in, it just makes the tool and even the devices that people are using more attractive to wide range of market, I think.
And I think this is part of Apple's marketing brilliance is their marketing tends to be very aspirational. So you see all these cool things that people are creating using their tools in their, in their marketing, and you're like, oh yeah, that's me, or I want to be like that. So it kind of pushes people up up the ladder capability wise, and maybe folks that would normally be perfectly well served by an iPad Air, because frankly, most of what us folks use tablets for is for media consumption. But they're like, oh well, maybe I'll actually make some music or do some do some art with the pencil, or do some video stuff or whatever, and it might push them up to the Pro if some of the features there are enticing enough for them. Whether or not they actually end up using those features or pursuing those creative endeavors is another question story altogether. I know that I think we're probably all guilty of overbuying based on capabilities and dreams to a certain extent.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's why I'm trying to be more realistic, because I have so many devices. Okay, what am I really going to do with this thing? Do I really need an iPad Pro? I think for me, for the tablet category, the iPad Air is just fine.
Yeah, it's very attractive to say like, oh, see someone doing all this stuff
Yeah.
with an iPad that was usually done on a pro computer, and it's like, ooh, that's like very cool. It's so flexible and portable.
And it's so easy to get obsessed with the gear. It's like, honestly, just use if you want to do something creative, use the gear you have and like prove it, right? And then if you start bumping up up against the limitations of the device, that's when you upgrade.
Yeah,
Right?
that's so many famous stories of people who've made some incredible art that everyone knows that had very limited resources, and you're like, how do they do it with that? But that's the inspiration. Sometimes you have to be creative with when you don't have the resources
Yeah,
and the
you've got
tools.
those constraints. I remember you like making multi-track songs using a Casio SK1 tiny sampling keyboard. Like
Yeah,
you max that thing out in the late '80s, right? So
yeah,
it's but it's easy to with good marketing and very capable products to get people to spend more than probably they absolutely need to, at least at this point. So that's our buying tip for today. Aspirational shopping is probably not good for your pocketbook.
yeah. It's
You
no
can, because you can do
coincidence that this software is coming out right around the time of the
right.
the
Exactly.
iPads and all.
Exactly. One other little thing I forgot to mention when talking about the iPad Pro hardware is they mentioned this in the keynote, is uh, they managed to get it even thinner, but the thermals, even with the like, they've got the increased efficiency of the chips, so that you can run all this demanding software without tons of thermal throttling. Which, because there's no fans in these things, right? So how do they manage to be so powerful? Well, it's the performance per watt, which Apple has been focusing on for years and years now, especially with the advent of their own Apple Silicon chips. So it's not just about raw power; it's about power per watt. How much power can you get with constraints, battery life, lack of potential lack of ventilation and or lack of fan, and so on. But one of the neat things they did is they built a copper coil, I believe, into the Apple logo on the back of the device. So now you've got an extra kind of like a heat sink and it's invisible behind the Apple logo on the back of the iPad. So I guess they've got the processor up against that, and it helps dissipate some of the heat through the Apple logo itself. So maybe
That's
just be
amazing.
careful if you're running lots of high intensity apps. Don't burn your hand or your fingers on the Apple logo.
No, these M chips are amazing. Like it's gone from the Intel with the fans on all the time to you never hear the fan. And so then you can do
On
it
the
with an
laptops. Yeah,
with an iPad, then it
yeah.
becomes practical. I mean, I don't know how they did it with the M4, but to get that kind of speeds with an iPad is that's really like showing off like, hey, look at our M4 chip, what it can do by introducing it in an iPad, right?
Exactly. All right. Well, I think that takes us to the end of our iPad news. We'll over the next week or two, we'll probably start to see the actual reviews come out. Some people had the initial hands-on at the Apple locations around the world, including London. But then it's going to start getting into Apple reviewers' hands, and I'm sure we'll start hearing it on podcasts and articles and YouTube videos
But you heard it here
soon.
first.
So let's get to a little bit of, speaking of Apple, a bit of entertainment news. And this was from a couple of weeks ago. We didn't get a chance to talk about it yet. Is that For All Mankind, which is an Apple Plus TV series that I know most of the Momentous crew actually watches. I don't think Tasia does, but I'm not 100% sure about Will. I know Gray does for sure. I do. And I know that you've been watching it.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's been renewed for a fifth season. So that's kind of the alt history series where, you know, the Soviets get to the moon first, so the space race continues unabated. Unlike in the real world, where the space race kind of cooled off after after the Americans got to the moon, and then they focused on the space shuttle program, and things kind of like meandered along for a while. And now it's starting to happen again with private industry like SpaceX and
Yeah.
others helping out. So, in addition to For All Mankind getting a fifth season for renewal, there's going to be a spin-off called Star City. And this totally caught me off guard. And
Hmm.
Star City is basically a similar story, but from the Soviet perspective. So that's going to be cool because we've seen some of the Russian characters in For All Mankind, some of, but only limited amounts. So now I guess this whole series is going to be from the Soviet perspective. So that's going to be really interesting to see. And I'm sure that, well, I imagine there'll be some crossover in characters. But I guess we shall see. But this is all, being helmed, I believe, by Ronald D. Moore, who was involved in Battlestar Galactica, the reboot from the early 2000s. He did a lot of Star Trek stuff, and then more recently, Outlander as well. So I don't know when we're going to actually see this. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not until 2025, but keep your eyes open for Star City if you like sci-fi, especially that kind of grounded in quasi-reality or alternative history. Now, Jerome, you threw something else. This isn't your momentous pick this week, but it's a little something. We were talking about tools that we can run on our devices. What's your angle here with the Otomy, and what do you got to tell us about it?
Well, I've been eyeing this for a while now, and I'm starting to feel like I need to incorporate this into my productions because of various challenges with singers trying to find the right singer, where they location and like life stuff, and this thing is not only like very high quality AI voices, but what this thing can do is take your own terrible singing and make it, by taking what you've sung and the nuances, emphasis, energy, and use an AI voice to replicate what you've done in a different person's voice that is a professional and really pleasing sounding singer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is very cool because um, the voices sound great and they have lots of options, and I could sing it exactly the way I want it with all the nuances, timing, and phrasing, and then get the AI to make it sound fantastic. So unlike my voice, so so this is very cool, there's a bunch of demos on YouTube of people like who can't sing well using this, and like it's just it's just been fairly commonly available with voiceover, where you can get a professional, amazing sounding British broadcaster to speak what you've said in a professional sounding voice. But music is a lot more difficult, and it seems to do a pretty good job. So I haven't honestly used this very much yet. I'm still working on the source track, of the vocal to input into this, but I think it's going to be pretty cool. And I think what I may end up doing is adding a AI member of certain music projects I have, and give them a name, give them a persona, and have some options for additional singers and in the project. So that would be. I'll let you know how it goes, but this is something that's really cool and fun that's come out, which sounds really impressive. If you want to listen to some of the vocalists on here, you'll get a sense.
So some of the key, and just for anyone that's listening, it's Audime, Audimee, and some of the key features are you can convert your vocals, as you mentioned, into another voice, and then there's a number of royalty-free voices to choose from. To be clear, you're not going to be using Johnny Cash or Taylor Swift or anything at this
No, they
point.
they don't give like
Yep.
in some sites have done this. They've said that the voice is this or that person,
Mhm.
but this site is trying to do professional like
Yeah.
services that you can use without legal issues, right? So
Exactly. Probably a good idea.
yeah,
You can train voices, so you can create an AI voice using 10 to 15 minutes of recorded vocals. So from yourself or someone in your retinue, I suppose. You
hmm
can isolate vocals from any song. So it's sort of like the stem splitting that we were talking about previously, but for concentrating on the vocals. You can mix voices, so you can mix some of the royalty-free voices with your own. And then they've got a feature called cover vocals, so cover acapellas. You can download the acapellas and use them in your remixes. So interesting. And then they've got all
yeah,
sorts of testimonials and examples. And apparently, there are people who are getting all sorts of plays on Spotify that are using this tool. So I haven't heard
yeah,
of these folks, but there's lots of modern music that I haven't heard of. So
yeah.
I look forward to a future update from you, Jerome, to see how this tool works out for you.
Yeah, it's I'm gonna try it and see. It's an interesting option, and they sound really good. So let's see what it can do.
All right. So let's move to our momentous picks and then we'll land this thing here. So, what is your momentous pick this week, Jerome?
Well, this is kind of a surprise that popped up on Apple TV, and it's Colin Farrell, so I was interested. And it's really nicely done. There's sort of a lack of detective or this kind of like thriller out there in the
Mhm.
series, and it really is a throwback to classic um, film noir type detective series, but it's got a modern edge to it. So it's paying tribute to the classic detective stories, from the 50s and 40s and 50s, but then it's got its own style, it's got its own direction, and it's very interesting character, this sugar guy, and he's got a lot of personal issues, but he's a really good guy. He really wants to help people, and he loves people, and he loves dogs. So you see this in the show, and you're really rooting for him. But then he's got his challenges, and
Mhm.
the story kind of that unfolds in the series becomes more and more complex, and it's kind of unexpected. So it's a nice series. It's unique, I think, in what's out there, and I think it's worth a look if you think you're like into that kind of the genre. But yeah,
So that's Sugar, starring Colin Farrell, and that is available for streaming now on Apple TV Plus.
mm,
I'd like to check that out.
yeah.
There's too much to watch.
Yeah,
Oh my
there's some lot
goodness,
of good stuff on
there's too
Apple
much
TV,
to
and
watch
it comes out of nowhere.
everywhere.
It's like, what is
Yeah.
this? So
It's too much.
yeah.
So my momentous pick this week is something I actually watched with you this past week, and it is the
Mhm.
original uh, movie from 1979, directed by Ridley Scott, and that is Alien,
Nice
starring
choice.
Sigourney Weaver and Tom Skerritt and others, Ian Holm, and yeah, no, I really encourage anyone if who if you see that your local movie theater is playing a movie on the big screen that you've really loved but have never gotten to see in the theater because maybe you were too young when it first came out. For example, Alien came out in 1979 and I was only 8 years old. And
We couldn't
my
get in.
I remember my dad telling me he saw it with a neighbor of his, and the said neighbor actually left the theater in the middle because it was too scary for him. It was a different time.
Yeah.
It was a more innocent time. So
It's kind
it
of
was.
like a movie you really have to see in the theater, some of
Oh
these.
yeah,
So like it's really nice that they brought it back. And I think it's an upgraded, um, enhanced. I don't know if you looked into like what
yeah.
they did, but
There was I believe it was 8, was it 4K or 8K remasters they've done of a few Ridley Scott movies, including The Abyss. But I think Alien was No, sorry, I'm getting confused with James Cameron. So they remastered Aliens and the Abyss, but it looks like they've done some updates to this because it looked very good on screen. It was
Hmm.
obviously digital as opposed to film, but it had been nicely cleaned up, and the colors were good. You could see it wasn't too murky. Um, and just to be able to enjoy that experience, I've seen it on video several times, but to see it in the theater is definitely a special experience. It's not quite the same shot. I still jumped a couple of times. There was a couple of jump scares in
Yeah.
there. And we went with a friend of the show, Michael, who had never seen it before. He's a bit younger than us. And he'd never even seen the movie before at all, even on video. So, and he's not a huge scary movie guy, but he likes sci-fi, and he enjoyed it as well. So, yeah,
Yeah. And it's worth mentioning there's an interview at the beginning with Ridley Scott,
right, yeah,
which is
with the director Fede Alvarez, who directs Alien Romulus, which is coming out in August. And when we had our beginning of the year episode, you had mentioned that was one of your most anticipated picks for 2024 in the
yeah.
movie category was Alien Romulus. So this was a nice little appetizer for
And
the
prequel, I
subject.
guess you could
Yeah.
say it's apparently in the
Yeah,
timeline.
because Alien Romulus is supposed to take place between Alien and Aliens, which was the sequel that was directed by James Cameron. So, yeah, we will see it.
Yeah.
Again, the mid-August the date for Alien Romulus makes me a little nervous because late August is mid to late August is often a dumping ground for movies.
Oh, really?
So, I hope it's
Oh
not
man.
terrible.
Well, yeah. If you think you're gonna want to see that, then see this as a
Yeah,
prequel. Go see the
exactly.
Alien.
But again, the general advice: if there's a movie in your because these theaters they'll play classic movies once in a while, and take advantage of something, whether it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark or Star Wars or Goonies or
Yeah, it's nice that
whatever
that
floats
they're
your boat.
doing that, isn't it? Like now, like
Exactly. And
get
like,
people
gets
back in
people
the
into the
theaters.
theaters.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's a big problem these days. So yeah, that's
Yeah, especially
makes
post
sense.
COVID. We got to retrain people. All right, so let's move on to our projects this week. What's this project you've got for us? Washington D.C. bus tours? What's that
Yeah, well,
about?
a lot of project we're working on. I can't say much about. So this is one I can say, which
Uh-huh.
is we did a tour of Washington D.C. and recently and in Chinese. So if you speak
Oh, okay.
Chinese and that's your language, then now you can have a Chinese option when you're going on the tour of Washington D.C. And before that, we did Hong Kong,
Hmm.
and
Oh,
we're now doing pre-production for the Berlin big bus tour in Chinese. So
so this is like so people would download and listen to these tours while they're actually on the tour in the big bus, correct?
yeah, and it's just not a voice-guided tour of what you see. It's got
Hmm.
clips of various celebrity figures, historical figures, Martin Luther King, and whatever you're seeing, relevant to what you're seeing. It's got music and
Oh, I
clips
see. Okay.
from the history, as well as three uh, guides, two male and one female guide that are accompany you on the tour. So it's quite entertaining.
So you could actually enjoy the tour without even being on the bus and then like replay it again while you're on the bus?
Yeah, kind of. I
Oh,
mean, you
I
could
see.
learn a lot, and you could know
Gotcha.
what you're seeing. The key
And
is you know what you're
refer back to
seeing.
it. Okay.
Yeah, when you're on the tour.
Gotcha. Very cool.
Yeah, so that's what
Um,
we've been doing.
and so the other stuff that you can't talk about, you also do a fair bit of work for certain video game companies and the like. And I know we've heard about some of those in the past, but we look forward to future updates on those projects when you're able to talk about them.
Yeah,
So if
we're
people
working
want
on
to
some
check out
games. Yeah.
your Washington D.C. bus tours, they can go to bigbustours.com, and then of course people can find out about all your various projects at let's see here www.prosol.com.
Yeah, that's the best one. My personal website is poorly updated. So,
Well, you can go to www.jerome with an a.com too. But
yeah,
yeah, go to
thanks.
prosol.com for the pro stuff. And so, yeah, jerome.com is kind of like your iPad Air site. And then
Yeah.
prosol.com is like your iPad Pro site.
Yeah, yeah, maybe you could say that. Tasia, we miss you.
Yeah, our lovely and talented colleague Tasia Custodi. Well, she has two videos that we'll just mention because we took the week off last week. One is the best Google Docs features. I've for 2024. And the other is the best Google Slides tips for 2024. So you can check those out. And she does a great job of recapping all that stuff in, 10 minutes or less. And you can find out her work at youtube.com/Tasia Custodi and TasiaCustodi.com for her other work as well. And then speaking of Tasia, as y'all know, she and I have another little side project called AI Named This Show. And our last episode was about a number of topics, including Claude AI from Anthropic. So the episode title is Claude AI, Time to Get to Work. And can you, I like, again, one of the fun things we do is tie in some imagery into the show theme. Can you parse what this one is? We got, what this imagery is here, Jerome?
Yeah, it's looks familiar.
Do you know who the actor is?
Claude Van Damme.
Yeah, Jean-Claude Van Damme. So we tied that in.
Is that from a movie he did?
Yeah, it's from Time Cop.
Oh,
so,
okay. I remember Time Cop. Okay.
So, time to get to work. And then
Yeah.
Anthropic, the tagline is Anthropic kicks things up a notch, because, Jean-Claude Van Damme likes to kick things.
Yeah.
He was in, Bloodsport, did a lot of kickboxing. And
Yeah.
it was either that or it was something about doing the splits. And I couldn't figure out a way to work that in. So.
It's always fun, your titles of the shows, and it's an entertaining and very informative show.
It's even better when you, thank you. It's even better when you have to explain the jokes. All right. So you can find all our episodes at www.ainamedthisshow.com. And of course, if you want to find out about this little show here, you can visit us at www.momentus.tv, where you can find our latest episodes, the audio and video versions, links to the socials from all our team members, and the audio episodes where you can subscribe on your podcast player of choice, and then links to all our socials as well. So again, that's at www.momentus.tv. And I think we did it, Jerome. Thank you so very much for joining us this week. Next week, we should be rejoined by Will Silver, hopefully Gray Williams, maybe Tasia Custodi. We'll see. It's a crapshoot every week. But until then, we hope your week is truly momentous.